wait a couple of minutes for everyone to hop into the CLE today, and then we can get started. Okay, I think that we can just start it to be respectful of everybody's time. Welcome. Just a few announcements before we begin the CLE for today. The CLE course number will be provided in the chat, and it will be listed at the beginning and at the closing of the CLE. So be sure to write it down so that you can report your CLE hours. And if anyone has questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A feature, which you see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And this CLE was organized by the DAYL Judiciary Committee. I'm a co-chair, and also Raha Asadi, the moderator for today, is a co-chair. And if anybody wants to get involved in planning for 2022 with our committee, the Judiciary Committee, let me know or let Sherry Harris know. Our next meeting in 2022 will be January 12th, and we typically have monthly meetings on Zoom the first Wednesday of every month. I want to take the time to introduce our moderator today. Her name is Raha Asadi. She's a labor and employment attorney with Jackson Lewis here in Dallas. She graduated from SMU with degrees in sociology and Spanish and received her JD from Baylor University. Raha is an active member of the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers and serves as co-chair for the Judiciary Committee. This year, she was appointed to the City of Dallas's Ethics Advisory Commission, where she now serves as a commissioner. During law school, she gained valuable courtroom knowledge, clerking with her two mentors, Judge Tanya Parker and Judge Eric Moyer. So Raha has great insight and familiarity with the Dallas County courts. So please, Raha, take it away.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you everyone for being here today. This is a CLE about kind of the status of Dallas County courts and how it's been affected by COVID-19 and what we see in the future. I want to take just a brief moment to introduce our panelists, Judge Moore and Judge Hayes. Judge Maricela Moore is the presiding judge of the 162nd Judicial District Court of Dallas County and the local administrative district judge for Dallas County. She previously served as the presiding judge for the Central Jury Room, and prior to her judicial service, she practiced commercial litigation with an emphasis on trade secret, breach of contract, and employment litigation. Judge Julia Hayes is the presiding judge of County Criminal Court Number 2 of Dallas County. She was elected to the bench in 2010. Prior to her judicial service, Judge Hayes operated her own law firm practicing criminal and family law. She's also clerked with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights and is a trained mediator. Thank you, Judge Moore and Judge Hayes, for taking the time to serve on our panel and to give us some insight. So with that, I'll jump right into it. The first question, really broad, but what is the status of things? Where are we at in Dallas County, and how is it different in criminal court versus civil court? So I'll let Judge Moore, if you want to go ahead and jump in with respect to civil.
Okay, so in June of 2021, we resumed in-person jury trials in both courthouses. And in the George Allen building, we began by having jury selection in the central jury room. So we kind of worked together, all of the presiding judges in George Allen, so that we could share that space, and we held jury selection socially distanced in that room. Beginning on Monday of this week, I removed the social distancing mandate for the courthouses in Dallas County, leaving in place the masking requirement. And I think I should begin by saying that during this entire time, there is a mandatory mask requirement in all of the courthouses, and that has not changed. The only thing that's changed as of this week is that in the courthouses, it is now the prerogative of the presiding judges to determine what social distancing, if any, they require in their courtrooms. So what does that mean to you, the trial lawyers that are on the CLE, we are picking juries in our courtrooms. I had a jury panel in here on Monday. I have another one coming in on Monday, and pretty much every county court at law and civil district court in George Allen is picking juries every week in their courtroom, with masking and other protocols in place. And the social distancing that you should expect basically depends on your particular judge. I always encourage practicing lawyers to reach out to the coordinators for your courts to find out what are the specific requirements in place. But the short answer to your question is we are back to picking juries, and we've done so very well in the civil courthouse.
You're muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry, Judge Hayes, what about the criminal courts?
So I think there's some important distinctions to make with regard to the civil and the criminal courthouses. Namely, I would first start by saying thank you all for inviting myself and Judge Moore to have this CLE. It's very important because there's just so much confusion going on amongst the bar. And so I want to thank you so much for including me and including the criminal courthouse, because a lot of folks don't come down here, but we still have some really important things going on with regard to the pandemic. So thank you all. First thing I'll say is that, in the course of the way the criminal justice system works, felony trials often trump misdemeanor trials. And that's because a lot of people that are charged with felonies, they're in jail. And our jail population has not significantly gone down because we're in a pandemic. So the folks that have remained in jail who are up for a trial, they're going to go first before the misdemeanor courts. Also, we have the grand jury selection process, which is, from my understanding, is something that's taken also from the jury pool, the central jury pool that's of jurors that are summoned down to the courthouse. And so when that's going on, for example, next week, there will be grand jury selection being conducted. And what that means is there won't be any jury panels available for jury trials. So that's kind of something that we weren't prepared for. So that, it happens quarterly when grand juries are selected. And so when that happens, you see a stall in that week's jury trials. We have been trying cases, as Judge Moore said, also since June. We've been conducting voir dire in both the central jury room and the cafeteria. Our cafeteria is closed, I think remains closed indefinitely. So with the misdemeanor jury trials, where we call down probably anywhere from 24 to 30 people, our cafeteria is large enough to socially distance them and be able to conduct a voir dire there, while perhaps a felony court may be doing a voir dire in the central jury room, as their panels are a lot larger. So I just want to add to what Judge Moore said, that this is a fluid situation, as has been the pandemic. And so we just really, really appreciate everybody's patience through this.
And Rob, can I make one other comment regarding the status? Because I forgot to mention this. There's been, I think, confusion about virtual trials. And there are other counties throughout the state that are using that as a mechanism to try cases. That is not something that Dallas County is doing. So to the extent that people have any concern or question about that, we did try, I think, one case, and based on data and analysis, we did a complete audit of that trial. We made the determination that it did not actually move the docket along any, and it was not the quality jury trial that Dallas County's judiciary decided we want to provide to our citizens and to the people that come to our courts. So we are not engaging in virtual trials in Dallas County.
Thank you, Judge Moore. That was actually going to be my next question. There's definitely been some confusion. Are virtual trials possible? Is that something that's happening? But based on what you're saying, that's not an option. However, there is a virtual component in the civil courts that doesn't necessarily exist in the criminal courts, if I'm understanding that right. Is that correct?
So I'll let Judge Hayes comment on how they're using the virtual tool in order to move cases along. I can tell you, in the civil courthouse, we use it extensively. And actually, I've used this quote so much, but I think it's so appropriate. Don't ever let a crisis go to waste. And this particular pandemic and our responsibility to think outside of the box has enabled us to consider and to implement different ways of court representation. How do you get in front of your judge? And for example, I'm starting trial on Monday. Instead of having my pretrial conference on Monday, I already had pretrial here by Zoom. Just the lawyers and the judge, we figured out all of our motions in limine, all of our expert issues, all of those things that need to be ruled on so that when we come on Monday, we're ready to go. We're not wasting jurors' time. I'd never done that before the pandemic. It never dawned on me that we could jump on a video conference with counsel and get the work done. So I think that if you are a young lawyer, get used to and become the expert within your firm on virtual representation, because it is not going anywhere. Yeah, I think it has a particular place in our system. I don't think you can do everything virtually, but I do think it is going to be a part of our system that's not going to go away, at least in the civil courthouse.
I think it's important to note that the judges, whether civil or criminal, are operating under the Texas Supreme Court orders, which have been altered, changed, supplemented several times over the last almost 2 years. But the one thing that has remained consistent is the Texas Supreme Court's delegation of the courts, in each individual court's discretion to conduct itself virtually, in person. I mean, there was a time where we weren't allowed to require in-person appearances, and that was the time at which I would say the criminal courthouse kind of jumped into gear. And I'm going to go ahead and take credit. The misdemeanor court judges, specifically Judge Shaquita Kelly, reached out and developed, got with the Court Call, which is a court video conferencing service for courts specifically, and developed and had the county commissioners approve the institution of Court Call in the Dallas County Jail so that we could communicate with defendants on a daily basis virtually. So the virtual component has very much been in existence in the criminal courthouse, especially in the misdemeanor courts. Now, as you all may know, there are very, very serious constitutional implications of a felony criminal offense, and the things that happen, and the importance of in-person appearance, the importance of live actual signing of documents, which have been, we've been disputing and dealing with this issue for a while. So there was a little bit of a delay with the felony judges coming on board with the Court Call virtual service, but they're coming on board. They have been on board. And so we're happy about that. And I just want to kind of add to something Judge Moore said, that these emergency orders that we've been, not emergency orders, the Texas Supreme Court orders that we've been operating under, they do authorize a virtual component, and they authorize virtual jury trials in criminal court in the event that all the parties agree. Now, as we follow the legal, you all are lawyers and you talk to other lawyers and they tell you, hey, I may not want to do that. Well, we talk to judges in our Office of Court Administration that helps us interpret the Supreme Court orders and whatnot. It's not recommended to us, but it is certainly possible that we are able to do these, but we just haven't done them, and for obvious constitutional reasons. And in addition to docket, it not really being something that helps the docket move along, it can also pose problems, obviously, with appeals of various aspects of the proceeding. So that's kind of why we haven't done that. But I will say this, I know that the Dallas County misdemeanor courts, we have been operating virtually since the beginning of the pandemic. We utilized things like Skype. We used Duo. We used whatever we could use. Why? Because this was a matter of people getting in and out of jail. And, there's a jail population concern at all times in the criminal justice system here in Dallas. And so we have always moved for several months virtually to address the jail population concerns and get people in and out of jail, get PR bonds, and bond amounts considered, because those things don't let up just because we're in a pandemic. We still have to comply with the Constitution, especially when people's liberty is at stake.
Judge Hayes, you mentioned a lot of things that I am so excited to touch on in a little bit, so we'll put a pin in some of those. So what does this mean for, Judge Moore brought up that, for example, she's able to do something that she didn't necessarily consider doing before, and it was a cost-saving measure for the parties when it comes time to actual trial and bringing in the jury. What has the last 18 months shown in terms of a backlog or a delay in the docket? Has there been any delay? And what, let's say, for example, if I have a trial set in February of 2022, what can I reasonably tell my client as far as whether it'll actually go?
Who's that question for?
Both. You can both
Okay,
answer.
so let me take a couple different questions that you've posed. First of all, regarding backlog, I think that there is, and this is, again, I'm speaking only about the civil courthouse, because we all know the civil issues and the criminal issues are very different. I say frequently, I am impressed and I admire the work done in the criminal courthouse, because there really is not as much flexibility as what we have in the civil courthouse in terms of what we can do to move things along. The civil practice is very paper intensive. There are things you can do to move cases along, get them to resolution, that it's just not the same. So Judge Haynes, you'll comment kind of about what's going on in Frank Crowley, but I can tell you, there really is not this huge backlog in George Allen that people assume exists. We work very hard, and actually not having trials every week or every day has allowed more time for the pleading process. And so, all of the motions to dismiss, the motions for summary judgment, all of those 91As, all of those other procedural matters that move the case along as well are getting heard and ruled on very efficiently. I love that I'm able to sit on a Zoom call. I had one just last week with a very complicated legal issue, and the lawyers even said, Judge, it's really nice not to have 3 other cases sitting in the audience waiting for your attention, and we can take as much time as we need, because quite frankly, if someone else pops into Zoom, I can say, counsel, this is going to take another 45 minutes. I'm going to get to the bottom of this issue. And so being able to do things in that way, at least in this time, has allowed us to move cases along. And so, I would say there's probably maybe 10% more, if less, in terms of the number of cases on a civil docket for one particular civil district court. But we are trying cases. We are getting people to trial. If you're set for trial in February 2022, my suggestion is you better be ready to go, because as we're able to pick juries in our courtrooms, and even depending on the kind of case, maybe have more than one trial in a week, which was very rare, we're able to move those cases along. Now, since it's being recorded, I want to say something very important. I do not have a crystal ball about what's going to happen in the next 6 weeks. We are very well aware the big elephant in the room is there is a new variant, and we have Christmas holidays coming and New Year's. So my hope and my plan is that in January, we are working full speed ahead to try as many cases as possible to continue to move those cases along. But I will be the first to say that if it is not safe to do so, I am not afraid of putting protocols back in place to keep jurors safe. That is the foremost responsibility of a presiding judge, is the health and safety of those that come here to serve under a court summons. I mean, that's kind of a big deal. So I don't think there's as much backlog concern as people like to talk about, at least in Dallas County, because we've been able to use different ways of moving cases along. And if you're set for trial, then first of all, do not come with some need for a continuance because you haven't done your discovery. That's almost laughable. And second of all, we will have the resources and jurors, hopefully, to try your cases.
One quick follow-up question to that. That said, let's say, for example, and this question applies to both of you, a client is severely immunocompromised or something, and in February the new variant happens to be very prevalent, is a continuance justifiable in that circumstance?
So my response whenever I have a case set, I have my docket calls on Monday. And if I call a case and the attorney says, Judge, this happened last week, Judge, my son just contracted COVID, I say no more. You do not need to say anything else. We'll get you a new trial date. The reason for that is we have enough cases. What we can get to you later. If you have a client, but of course, now this is something I can do because in the criminal context, it's not as easy to do that. But I have that ability to say, look, I don't want to get into your, personal business. And I'm not concerned with, are they being honest? Because quite frankly, I mean, shame on you if you're going to lie, whether it's an attorney or a juror, about something as sensitive as your health. Shame on you. But as a judge, I just don't feel like I can even go near that. And so, yes, I am very liberally giving flexibility to those that have health concerns when they come into the courtroom.
Judge Hayes, you mentioned when we talked about this, going from having multiple trials in a week to having only one guarantee that you'll be able to call a jury in the course of a month, if I'm understanding that correct. How has that affected your docket? And same question for you. Is there a delay or backlog in the docket?
Well, yes, we definitely have a backlog in the docket. I preside over a misdemeanor criminal court, 90% of which cases are DWIs. There's an increase in DWIs during the pandemic. Okay. And when I say that, DWI arrests, obviously these cases, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And so, believe it or not, there has been an increase in DWI case filings since the pandemic began. And what that means is there's an increase in consideration of everything that's involved in a DWI, including the request for personal recognizance bond, the request for alterations of the bond, the imposition of interlock device requirements on their vehicles or portable devices or ankle monitors. It's a constant monitoring that's going on. And so all of that activity increases as the number of cases being charged increase. We also have seen an increase in family violence assault cases. And I think these are, people can reflect upon how this happens. The researchers can discuss humanity and the things that go on that may cause an increase in drinking or an increase in violence in the family. Nonetheless, it definitely has contributed to a backlog and an increase in our dockets. So much so that just recently, probably within the last 2 weeks, the county commissioners have approved a backlog criminal court, which will obviously, because the felony cases trump the misdemeanor cases, will first deal with the felony cases with individuals who are incarcerated in the Dallas County Jail, because again, they can't bond out. For whatever reason, they can't, even though, everyone has a constitutional right to bond, right? There are circumstances that judges have to consider whether or not to lower bonds or grant personal recognizance bonds. The situation clearly is more difficult when you're dealing with the felony, higher level criminal offenses, especially the violent offenses. And so our backlog is such that we need another court and another judge, and it's being created and funded to start taking on some of this, because in the criminal realm, folks have not that just hasn't slowed down. So
2 follow-up questions on that. I'll start with the first one, which I think is one of the more fascinating things that, frankly, I didn't consider before. What are the ramifications of these delays, specifically in criminal courts, with respect to constitutionality, right to a speedy trial? Does this change that?
Well, everything is taken on a case-by-case basis. And we're still waiting in the criminal courts for, direction and guidance from the higher courts, because that's who we follow their interpretation of things, for what the pandemic constitutes. Is that a delay? Is that is it to a delay to blame on anyone in particular? We're looking for guidance, and a lot of times we don't have it. So we're kind of like taking cases of first impression, whereby some of these speedy trial motions I know I've heard were delays that were attributable to things going on far before the pandemic, and those are easy. But then the ones that started right smack with March of 2020, that kind of, I've just had to kind of do my own thing with it, because I have no like Court of Appeals, Fifth District, or the Court of Criminal Appeals to tell me, or the US Supreme Court for that matter, to tell me how the pandemic affects the movement of my docket. I think, and I'm kind of just giving you an idea of what I've heard that maybe some federal judges are doing around the country, that the pandemic is not attributable to any fault to any of the parties. That's what I've heard so far. So, but again, it's a case by case basis. But obviously, the pandemic exists, and there are things there are delays and things that follow from delay that we must consider in the speedy trial analysis, that just don't go away just because we can't find who to blame the delay on. So the answer to your question is yes, I think there's potentially an effect on justice from the delay, no matter if it's anyone's fault or not. It's, it does affect like the memories of people, potentially the existence of witnesses. All of these things are very important to the carriage of justice. And so we're just kind of figuring it out as we go along, hoping that this thing can subside at some point. The pandemic can subside.
So is it fair to say you're seeing more speedy trial motions?
Yes, definitely.
You mentioned before, and I will jump back into civil shortly, but you
this is actually interesting for me as well. I am very in awe of the constitutional challenges that are being tackled by our colleagues in Frank Crowley, for sure.
Likewise. You mentioned PR bonds. How has the availability of PR bonds changed? In my mind, it seems that trials happening less frequently presumably means people are in jail for longer. How has it been easier, harder to get PR bonds and to get people out of jail, at least temporarily?
Well, the constitutional considerations of bond do not change with the pandemic. And by the way, they do not change on governor's orders. We must take into consideration the same constitutional standards of considering whether or not to grant a PR bond or change the amount of somebody's bond. That doesn't change. Our discretion doesn't change. I mean, unless, that fateful 9 at the top, or that the Court of Criminal Appeals tells us, hey, we're going to change the constitutional considerations of bond. We're not really, honestly, in a position to change that because of a governor's order, for example. I talked to Rahan, and this would be a nice, interesting revisitation of the separation of powers for the lawyers on the line. This is the judicial branch. It doesn't change. Our level of discretion is the same across the board. And I think Judge Moore would agree with me. It's when the executive branch comes in and says, do this at the spur of the moment, and we have no guidance from the US Supreme Court or the Court of Criminal Appeals, or from the Fifth District Court of Appeals here in Dallas, for that matter, it's kind of hard to just disregard our normal line of authority behind a quick executive order that happened in a quick pandemic situation, which we all understand. This is some trying times, and it's a lot of cases of first impression, but rest assured that, I think I speak for myself. I'll just say that we stick to the constitutional guidelines. The pandemic has not pierced that Constitution just yet that I'm aware of. Now, the US Supreme Court is hearing some very important cases right now as we speak. And when they come down with something, we follow that, but it's kind of difficult to, us judges, and whether we admit it or not, we're navigating this strange field of discretion. Like, we're like, has it changed? Because it's always been this way. Judge Moore, she may comment on this, like, I know that I'm going to consider this. This is what, these landmark 60-year-old cases tell me to do. And then this pandemic hits and suddenly it's, you know what? Don't let anyone out of jail who falls in this category. That's very hard because we're required to look at everybody as an individual, one by one.
The SCOTUS definitely has me sweating for the last couple of days. I'll say that. So my next question is for both of you, and it actually ties in directly with a question that we've gotten in the Q&A box. The question is, in the jury trials that have taken place, how have COVID and COVID-related issues influenced or affected juries? In other words, any common threads that distinguish pre- and post-COVID juries? And this ties into the next question I had, because Judge Moore, you and I talked about a very interesting pattern that juries they have a noticeably different perspective. And so what they're willing to, give out and award has been a little bit different. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. So I think that in the civil context, all the judges will agree that the economic and the health and safety concerns that all of our communities are confronting have caused a different perspective by jurors when they walk in our courtrooms. And what I mean by that is, example, last week I'm picking a jury in a case that has, plaintiffs asking for upwards of $1 million in soft damages. This is not your medical expenses, it's all the other stuff. And we busted the panel because the jury panel, the veneer panelists, just one after the other said, I just can't see myself giving that kind of money. I mean, it's almost like you can feel within the room, everyone's hurting a little bit, right? And so it's a little bit harder to be sympathetic towards someone because there's just a higher level of hurt that has impacted our communities, and so someone commenting about their inability to work, people, whether it's right or wrong, go to, well, we've had all of these government programs over the past year. We haven't been able to work either. We weren't in a motor vehicle accident, or, all of the pain and suffering. Well, I had COVID. And so people, I think, at least in the civil context, have not been as enthusiastic about giving those soft damages to plaintiffs. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to change. Perhaps we're all kind of still in shock. And perhaps we spent so much time at home watching the news and seeing so much hardship and so much frustration that it's difficult for a plaintiff's attorney to tell a story that goes above and beyond that which is almost a bit of the norm in our communities. But in this particular time, I think for those plaintiff's attorneys on this CLE, they will probably agree that it's not the same as it was in 2017, 2018 right now in terms of our jury verdicts. Not to say there still aren't some. I'm sure someone will get in the chat and say, oh no, there was a big verdict that came out of Williamson County. Yes, those still do occur. But the weekly, just small ones that don't even make the headline, I don't think those are happening right now.
Judge Hayes, what about you? Any big changes or shifts you've seen in juries?
Honestly, I find it incredibly refreshing that we've actually been able to try cases and just really people don't seem to be discussing that so much. I mean, we have our initial, have you guys been exposed to COVID in the last 7 days or whatever it is? And I'm gonna be honest with you, it's like these jury trials, I get them so few, only one a month if I can, just to get into, let's talk about standardized field sobriety test. Let's get into all this so I don't have to think about the pandemic for a while. So actually, I think that's very interesting what Judge Moore said about how it could affect like substantive issues in a case. In my experience, it's just, I'm actually surprised by the amount of non-focus on the pandemic, and perhaps the jurors are happy to be doing something different as well.
Mm-hmm. Judge Hayes, can I ask you a question? Because I'm just going to come in. We're just going to make this a conversation. We're more of a podcast now than a moderated discussion. So in speaking to some of my colleagues around the state that, have more of a general jurisdiction. One of my colleagues commented that the fact that the COVID protocols prevent victims and their family members and other people from being in the courtroom, there's a concern that that may prohibit a finding of guilt in certain cases because all of those other players can't be in the courtroom because of social distancing. Have you seen that come into play at all, where the COVID protocols perhaps that don't allow the same type of presentation of the case have impacted verdicts?
Well, honestly, Judge Moore, because we have I think I know it's a Supreme Court case that requires that our courts be public. I have not precluded anyone from the courtroom outside of the invocation of the rule in a jury trial. Other than that, I mean, when people do come in, we just make sure that they're distanced. And I happen to be a court using my discretion that requires masks in the courtroom. Some people will ease it up if they want. We actually socially distance the jury box. So we've reconfigured where people sit during the trial, including the jury. They're not sitting together in that box. They're spread out around the courtroom. So honestly, I don't know that I can say it has any effect, because folks are allowed to come in as long as they're distanced and masked.
That's great.
I feel like the general consensus is that people are not super thrilled about being called to serve on a jury, but maybe now they're actually happy to, because it requires them to, get out of the house and, do something. So that's a good thing.
Well, there's been an instance where I've told people this story. I've had both Mark Cuban and Mike Madonna on my juries in the past. And when I tell people that, they're like, "Ooh, I want to come to jury duty. Maybe I'll be on one with Mark Cuban or some celebrity." So I tell people that to encourage them to answer their
That's
summons and
too
come on.
funny.
Yeah,
Did they actually make it onto the
both
trial?
of them were on the
jury?
panel. Both of
Is that
them were
right?
on the jury. Yes, ma'am.
You know that those lawyers were just starstruck. They're like, "Hey, let's have an agreement. We'll keep them. Maybe we get something signed at the end of this."
Yeah. Maybe they'll be the one
fun.
to sign the final order.
Whatever works, right?
Judge Moore, this is maybe more of a civil question, and I don't want to belabor the point about the fact that there's really not, as much of a delay as maybe we thought. When we as lawyers are preparing proposed scheduling orders, should we take that into consideration and assume that there won't be any sort of substantial delay, and that, the regular course of discovery and setting a trial date should not change?
Yes, you should not assume any change. Actually, what happens in my court, once the answer is filed, my court coordinator sends out a jury trial date, and that will then navigate the entire scheduling order. But we're not setting them out like 18 months out or some new novel way of calendaring, because we've got a lot of cases to try. We're getting it all in. And so it has not changed. If you file a case, get ready to work it. There's no downtime. So that's what you should expect in our courts.
And how are judges handling their submission dockets? Has it changed? Has it increased, decreased?
I think it's increased to an extent. I think this idea that you could actually have small matters considered by the court without an in-person hearing. I mean, I don't know why we thought before that everything had to be in person. It really doesn't. So yes, it's absolutely, but there's another side of that. I have a huge multi-million-dollar case, and we had a big hearing set about 2 weeks ago. And at the end, they said, "Judge, since we didn't get to the motions to compel, we've agreed to just submit that to you so you can consider it by submission." I mean, I'm talking, these are like, 14-page motions. And so, yes, I'm happy to do that. But I think that now that there is more of a confidence in the submission docket, lawyers have kind of opened their minds to, well, we don't need to sit here with the judge for 2 hours going through a motion to compel. Let her just do all that work. So sometimes even I'll begin by submission, and I just don't feel like it's being briefed apples to apples. And I'll tell Melinda, look, just tell the lawyers I need a 30-minute with them. And sometimes we move it along that way. But like I said at the beginning, we're just doing things differently. We're being more efficient, using a little bit of in-person, a little bit of video, a little bit of by submission. And I really think that's why we're moving so many cases forward.
Are you seeing a lot of obviously a lot of depositions are happening virtually now too. Do you have any preference one way or the other that the parties meet in person or virtual? Are you seeing a lot of parties kind of not be able to agree on the format in which the deposition is going to be taking place?
So first, I'm a big believer that judges should not micromanage cases, because I don't know your clients. I don't know your, I've got 1,200 cases on my docket. You are one of them. To suggest that I know more about yours than you do is crazy. I will tell you that in many cases, the lawyers have agreed that a video deposition is just fine. It's an economical way of getting testimony on the record. However, where the parties do not agree, I may be an outlier, but I've been pretty vocal about my opinion. I think that being in the same room, sitting with someone and cross-examining them keeps people honest. So if there's no agreement, I do not require people to engage in any kind of in-person testimony by Zoom. I found that out, unfortunately, when we were at the beginning of the pandemic and I was doing quite a few non-jury trials by Zoom. And it was shocking to me that, people sitting in their kitchens, kind of getting out with pajamas on the bottom and a sweater on top with their coffee, testifying to the court, they weren't honest, in my opinion. There's just something about the sanctity of in-person, the courtroom, having an attorney right in front of you. Maybe it's the butterflies in your stomach that keeps you honest. And that's just my experience, in my opinion. So I do not require any type of video deposition. It has to be by agreement of the parties.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I've noticed even, other attorneys who are taking depositions that I'm on virtually, even, their behavior is just slightly different than it would be in person. And it's, I think, noticeable. Given that there's hopefully, as of today, the inaccurate notion that there's this, huge delay and backlog will no longer be the case. But given that kind of false idea that's kind of been around, has there been more of a push for early mediation? And are you seeing that cases are being mediated and settled earlier on, or are you not really seeing any sort of pattern there?
So just kind of the way the system works in the civil context, when we were not setting cases for trial, cases were not really settling at mediation. And the reason for that, if you think about it practically speaking, why would a defendant go ahead and resolve and pay when they can keep their money until they have to? I mean, it's just, it's business, right? It's very different than, what Judge Hayes has to deal with, because there isn't this other notion of resolution through ADR. Once we started putting cases back to trial in June, the number of cases settling at mediation skyrocketed. People really started going, okay, you're going to try this case. Judge Moore is going to take you to trial. I think there was a question from someone in the chat about how many cases are you setting for trial each day? And if you're set, are you going to go? The way that I'm handling my cases, I have docket call on Monday, and pretty much if you're set for trial, I'm holding you to a 2-week docket, unless you've had a conversation with the court about experts, someone's out of town, something that logistically makes it unfair to you to kind of be on call. But short of that, there are quite a few cases set on the same day, and we're trying to do whatever we can to get our jury panels to work. So there are quite a few being set, and they're being called. Maybe not on the day that you anticipated. Pre-pandemic, we always called cases to trial on Monday or Tuesday. I do not know why. It's just the way we did it. And now, why not start jury trial on Wednesday or Thursday? What's the big deal? Just have your hearings on Monday. And so we're moving things around a little bit, and it's allowing us to try more cases that way.
So does that mean that there was a period of time in which you weren't setting cases for trial at the outset?
Well, they were already set for trial, but we just had to continue them because we weren't having jury trials. So for quite some time, I think I was in trial in March of 2020. I remember it was like a 2-week trial. And when that jury deliberated, that's when all this came down. And I remember thinking, I think this might be my last jury for a while. Well, little did I know it was going to be my last jury for 14 months. Mm-hmm. So, we were shut down from March of 2020 until we began again, like Judge Hayes said, in June of 2021. Quite a long time.
Yeah. Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to take some time just for the few questions that we have in the Q&A. So if you have any questions at this time, please put them in there. So I'll start one that you kind of touched on. For situations where multiple civil cases are set on the same day, on average, how many of those cases are Dallas County courts calling for trial each week? If the average is one per week, is the general approach to carry cases over to the next week or reset for a period of time to make room for cases set the following week?
So that's kind of what I was just saying. If you have a 2-week docket, be prepared on that 2-week docket. I will tell you that using video conferencing has allowed us to be a little bit more efficient about the way we call cases. For example, I had docket call on Monday, and I also had a jury coming on Monday. When I had that docket call, I figured out which case I was going to call. I have 2 on hold this week. I had my pretrial conference today. I told them, okay, guys, are you guys going to settle or are you going to go? Because, you know, when you get right in front of lawyers, you can pretty much figure it out. And as long as they don't tell me by Friday they're settling, I'll release the other 2. If they tell me on Friday they've settled, one of those other 2 that are on hold, they're coming on Monday. And so, you know, I think that for these smaller cases, this is not a one size fits all, but for those smaller cases, if you are set for trial, don't be lackadaisical about your pre-trial requirements. You need to be ready for trial. And if you're not, and you get caught flat-footed, I don't think you'll find much flexibility or sympathy from a court these days. We're ready to go.
Yeah. So another question asks, in Dallas County and district civil courts, is it likely that DWAP hearings, motions to quash hearings, et cetera, will continue to be heard virtually?
So again, I think this is something you would have to ask each specific judge. I'll tell you, in my court, the 162nd, I'm going to continue DWAPs, docket call, pretrial conference, small discovery motions, Chapter 18 motions to strike, all of those kinds of hearings, I'm going to continue virtually. So definitely, like I've said, if you are a young lawyer and you want to set yourself apart in your firm, be the best at PowerPoint by Zoom. How do you screen share? How do you make your partner look good with the right light and the right camera and the right, you know, all of these little things matter because it's not going away. This is going to be part of our civil practice for sure.
And that said, one of the things that we talked about was, you know, if the parties insist or, you know, prefer that they're in person, you know, is that an option? And you also mentioned, you know, you're available. The court is available for in-person hearings. And the same way, you know, there's value in being in person for a deposition. You know, do you think there's that same sort of value for showing up in person for a hearing?
So as you can see, I'm in my courtroom. I usually have my robe on. I hold my court from my courtroom virtually every single day. And the reason I do that is first of all, I think I look really stupid walking around my house in my robe. I think my neighbors would make fun of me. But second of all, I think there's something, and Judge Hayes, I'm sure you agree, there's something that creates a sense of importance to our institution. There's a reason that judges wear robes. There's a reason that we're on a bench that's that sits a little bit above. There's a reason that all of these things exist. And I think it reminds everyone that this is a system of justice that we have all given our professional lives to. And so absolutely, if there is a case where the attorneys need to come before the court, come on in, I'm here. All Bob has to do is unlock the door. Every single day, that's the way that we handle it. And I know Judge Hayes, in your courthouse, that's really the way you have to because of the way that people are coming in from the jail population. Isn't that right? I mean,
well,
are most of y'all in the courthouse, or how do you guys handle it?
You know, actually, you know, let me tell you, and I love this because it has allowed more flexibility for our lawyers to be able to appear virtually. I've had people appear from their car. I asked them,
hopefully not driving.
No, and they have, and I've asked them, please pull over. So that's the only time I've ever pulled someone over. I'm not a cop, but I had to pull some lawyers over when they come on my Zoom with they're moving. I can see the background moving. I've talked to people. I've been able to talk to defendants and conduct their hearings in the break room at their job. They don't have to skip work to come down here. This is situation where a lot of people don't have money to just be missing work. Lawyers, criminal lawyers often have to be in 3 different counties at the same time. So guess what? You know, where we can be a little more flexible, Dallas tends to be a little more flexible in the contiguous counties. I am happy to accommodate lawyers virtually from their cars, their homes, from other states, they're traveling. I've eased up on my formalities. I mean, I've had defendants appear in their bed, ask them to put a shirt on. I said,
my gosh.
leave the meeting and put your shirt on, please, and come back. And they've done it. They've complied. I've had
You
people
are very
appear.
patient.
Well, it's criminal court, myself. I mean, Judge Moore. So, you know, it's a whole different bag of tricks over here. And I've had people appear on Zoom with me who are COVID infected. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So, you know what? It's like you show up, you're on, and my Zoom is every 15 minutes. People know they cannot, this is not a situation where you can walk in wherever you want. Either you get on Zoom on time or you don't. And so that has actually helped me move my docket much faster because people actually show up on time on Zoom. They do not show up on time generally in person. So that helps, you know, Judge Moore talked about things that have helped from the pandemic to move the docket. It actually helps my docket that people are on time. Another thing, and this may not be the issue in the civil courthouse, my internet at home, that 5G fiber is way better than the internet in the criminal courthouse, where we've experienced significant technical difficulties, and it's just for the moment difficulties. We can't move the docket because I will say, and I've been keeping track of the amount of lawyers that request virtual versus in person. The virtual requests far outnumber the in-person requests. So when I have my fiber at home working great, I mean, it works great, ladies. But then I come to the criminal courthouse and it doesn't work sporadically. That delays the docket. So there's some advantages of working from home. There have been for me. And things have been addressed that would have, like, I would have never been able to do a plea on Zoom with a person who, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do a plea with someone who has COVID in the courthouse. And it's been instances where the lawyer or the defendant had COVID. I've had instances, all of my prosecutors at one point or another have been quarantined due to exposure. Now, thankfully, they didn't get it. Right. But they were exposed to someone who did. And let's just think about how they could have exposed everyone else.
For sure.
Had we been working in person. So I believe that Zoom has been a gift. The Office of Court Administration, in case the lawyers on the line don't know, has provided the licensing to the judges with the protections, you know, that come with it for us to do our Zoom hearings. We don't have to pay for those as individual court budgets. The Office of Court Administration has graciously provided that. And so it's always here. All of us are familiar with it. And so if somebody has a reason why they need to Zoom, I'm always open to virtual hearings. But I want to piggyback what Judge Moore said earlier about assessing one's credibility on Zoom. You know, this becomes a constitutional issue in the criminal courts. So we've had people challenge the mask wearing of a witness. Challenge because I do motions to suppress, speedy trial motions virtually. And so if somebody has an objection to that, we will certainly accommodate, consider that objection. And most times, I mean, folks, you have a right to assess the credibility of a witness. And if that can't be done over Zoom, and if it can't be done in a mask, very certainly you should raise the issue. Don't be afraid. And we're in it's just new times. So there's not an issue that I would say don't raise. Raise the issue as lawyers, and it may be some novel thing that nobody thought of. If you're an attorney that's concerned about your child getting COVID, and you know, like during the times before our children could get vaccinated, use your voice. Like, we're not here to endanger anybody, ourselves included. So if you're uncomfortable, and like Judge Moore said, you know, if someone expresses discomfort because of the pandemic, say less. That's something that the young people are saying, in case you didn't know. Say less means you don't have to say anything else. I get it. So just say less. I mean, we are all trying to accommodate. And at the same time, I want you to bear in mind, and some of you lawyers out here probably know, it's a totally different culture in the contiguous counties than it is in Dallas. And just because someone else makes a certain decision about their health
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that decision has to usurp your decisions about yours and your family's health. So I found myself in many situations where maybe outside of the court context, where other people wanted me to adopt their feelings and opinions about how they see the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I refuse to change that because I have concerns about my and my family's health. And I don't want any of you to, just kind of as a side note, I don't want any of you to feel like you can't advocate for your own health and safety and that of your family.
I think that's really important. Absolutely true.
Well, thank you both so much. I don't want to go over. We have about 4 minutes left, and I'd rather give you your 4 minutes than any more of your time. I want to thank you both for being here, not just, for serving on this CLE today, but for having to be the civil servants that have to do a little bit more work than the others, and having to navigate such a novel situation. I know that, I really appreciate it. I'm sure that, all 70-something people here really appreciate it. Thank you for your service now and always, especially during this really difficult time. The CLE information is posted in the chat box. So if you haven't already copied that down, because it won't be available to you later. I mean, I'm sure you can get it from Sherry, but you can do that now. And then otherwise, I hope this has been helpful for all of you. I know it's been very helpful for me, and selfishly, I've gotten a lot of my questions answered. So thank you both so very much for your time, and we hope to see you at the next CLE.
Thank you all.
Thanks for doing this. I encourage y'all to continue to do Zoom CLEs because, the fact that you have 70 people here, what a great way to get information out to them. So I'm sure Judge Hayes agrees, if y'all ever need to chat with the courts, just give us a call. You know where to find us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Have a good day.
Have a good one.